Let's go!
So the Multiversus news is actually pretty crazy because it's the same. Multiversus had a unique update about where they're going content-wise, right? It's an interesting situation because this is kind of what we were predicting when we were talking about the game in its current state, where I'm like, I don't think it's dead, man. I think it's like, I think they're trying to figure out what they're doing content-wise, and they're gonna probably, you know, go dark for a while, and or if not, come and show up with what they got. It's a lot further out than what I thought it would be, like 2024. Anyway, let me actually find the Multiversus tweet. The reason, I mean, overall, I don't know if Multiverse is going to be the game, Multiverses, sorry, is going to be the game that is like really for me in the end of all things. But I think it's a fascinating case study, obviously, of what can happen, what free-to-play can do for a fighting game. Whether or not that game is exactly what people want, you know, really comes down to the quality of the game itself. To me, it was always painfully clear that Multiversus was never like content complete, right? Even if it in its base state. I thought it several times because of the really bad communication that had been established for a while now, that it feels like we exited beta several times, and anytime I would go back and check, I'm like, no, the game's still in beta, and we're like, you know, several characters into the release schedule, and it's like, this is weird. This is weird that they're like releasing content, you know, and it's still getting new things that are purchasable, and we're still in a beta state. It's very odd. And then it was haphazard. So maybe let's watch this.
Hi everyone, this is Tony from Player First Games, and I'm here today on behalf of the entire Multiversus team to say thank you for your support during our open beta. We've been excited to see the interest and enthusiasm from the community, and your feedback has been invaluable to us. We continue to be humbled by the awards the game has received, and excited to see the enjoyment that Multiversus has brought to players. Throughout our open beta, we've been working hard to build the best gameplay experience, and we appreciate all the inspiration you've given us. Our open beta has been an important learning opportunity for us, and a stepping stone to the next phase of Multiversus. We know there's still a lot of work to do. As a result, we have a clearer view of what we need to focus on, specifically the content cadence of new characters, maps, and modes, to give you more ways to enjoy the game.
They're
Along
aware.
with an updated netcode and more matchmaking improvements, we'll also be reworking the progression system based on your feedback, and looking at new ways for you to connect with your friends in the game. To do this the right way, we'll be closing the Multiversus open beta 90 days from today. As part of this process, we'll be pausing updates and taking the game offline as we prepare for the launch of Multiversus, which we're targeting for early 2024. I'm sure you're wondering what this means for you. During this downtime, all online modes and features will be unavailable. You will have limited offline access to the training room, known as a lab, and local matches, along with access to your characters and cosmetic items within these modes.
Oh, so it's playable offline. That's
good.
good.
We know that this news might be disappointing, but rest assured, Multiversus will be back. We'll also ensure that all your progress and content will carry over when Multiversus returns next year, with a variety of new content, features, and modes. Along the way, we'll be providing updates, so keep an eye on our social channels and website. Thank you again to the entire Multiversus community. We greatly appreciate your passion and excitement, and look forward to our next chapter with you. Thank you.
So it's very good that it's still playable offline, and if we go and look at the like the frequent questions related to this, there was an update that your content and all the stuff that was purchased as a result of it will be transferred over when the game like officially launches type stuff. This is a weird situation. This hasn't happened to many fighting games before, but this has absolutely happened to other free-to-play games that have come out in the past. I have been privy to higher level conversations about like investment meetings and stuff like that regarding certain games that either I'd want to be a part of or things of that nature, and ultimately learning that an incredibly successful launch can actually be a death sentence sometimes for games. And it happened to Multiversus. Like the exact same thing happened to these guys, where they were not prepared for how many people were going to be playing their game at launch. They were not prepared that like the free-to-play aspect of it brought in a lot of people, and their expectations were essentially like blown out of the water by how many people were playing. So here's the weird thing about these development teams. There's a game called Splitgate. right? From what I understand, it was very Halo-like. Apparently, a very small development team as well, like 10 to 15 people, something like that. And they had a absolute massive launch, like a friggin' huge launch. Like suddenly they were ready for approximately like maybe like 5-digit numbers, like maybe 10,000 to 50,000 people actually playing their beta, and it was like millions. Like suddenly it's huge, and there's a ton of people. So here's the problem with that. Number one is the Liveops operations part of it, where suddenly there are way more people playing your game, and you have to start reallocating people to make sure the game actually works, because suddenly your server space, suddenly your all the data throughput is not nearly enough for what you were anticipating. So a lot of the resources that were going into making your game, because you have a small team, is essentially dedicated to figuring out how do we keep this thing up and running. For that situation, you have to allocate bandwidth of your small team for game operations, for live ops, right? And that starts to become a messy part, because you have to start making content, right? You run into a problem where it's like, well, we need to go offline, right? No, we actually have to take the game down so we can start working on this thing. You ultimately can't. Like when there's like 100,000 people playing your game a day or something like that, even over 50,000 people that are logging in, it becomes very difficult to just turn it off at an early state, even though you were planning on the game being live for a smaller period of time or something like that, right? Even like an open beta, like Multiversus situation. What I'm thinking is a very similar, right? Is a very similar thing that happened here. We've heard multiple times that Multiversus crew is like what, like 12 to 15 people. Very small amount, and they were also going through a ridiculous amount of stuff happening at Warner Brothers at the time. Multiversus was obviously not a content complete game at launch. Like it was what it was, and you could play it online for the most part until like a lot of other issues started coming up, especially with netcode, and it started evening out with players. But a very similar situation where they were kind of blindsided by how many people logged into their game and how many people are continuing to play it within that first month, where it becomes very difficult to just take it all offline suddenly. So then they started updating the game with characters. There's actually costumes and cosmetics, but it wasn't great, almost like they just ham-fisted it in really fast. And that's most likely the situation where the WB guys were maybe in a moment where it's like, no, you cannot take it offline. There's too many people playing. That would be bad optics, all this kind of stuff, right? That's a bad decision, because it's bad optics in the long run to have something just not be able to catch up, because most of the team was probably dedicated to making sure everything was just fucking working, couldn't be dedicated to like specifically making content. So this is not a unique situation, and it's something I've heard time and time again with other games, not specifically fighting games, but other games like Splitgate and stuff like that, that had really astronomically huge launches, and the devs just have to find a way to keep up. Absolutely unprepared for the amount of success that is thrown their direction. The other biggest issue of Multiversus is that they were never clear, right? There was never a clear and concise message as far as how things are going to be rolling out content-wise. We would hear things about like single-player modes and stuff like that, but nothing finite, which ultimately comes down to they don't know exactly what to do. It's like, it feels like the game exited beta, but it never actually exited beta. I feel like this is the right call, you know, because they need to do this. You need to take everything offline and figure out what the final release of the game actually is, because Multiversus was never in its final form. It seemed like it exited beta, but it was actually never out of its beta state. And I think once again is a clear and concise example that if you have something that's a decent enough idea that enough people are into, that have like the characters and, you know, the elements that will bring people in, whether it's a Splitgate situation or a Multiversus situation, people show up. And, you know, especially if it was free to play, if Multiversus came out again at like the $30 to $40 price range, and it came out with the content that it did, it would have tanked. It would have been, you know, like a Nickelodeon All-Star kind of situation. I'm kind of hoping the game is going to have like a roster of characters and be fun to a point where I might enjoy the gameplay a little bit more by the time it eventually comes out. There's nothing specifically wrong with Multiversus gameplay. It ultimately feels like a not Smash Brothers to me, you know, and I go back to Smash Brothers and realize how good everything feels and why I like Smash Brothers so much. This is a unique situation, kind of like a warning to a lot of developers that might be trying to do something like free to play for a fighting game. It's good that they have a head on their shoulders and it's available offline, right? It's good that all the content that you have is still going to like function and continue forward. It's going to be there. To have a beta last that long, to have things go that far, can this be a red flag? Unless you're hoping Multiversus is dead, right? Unless you're hoping for the game's demise, this is probably the best thing they could do for the future of the game. Because it'll likely launch with single player modes, it'll likely launch with co-op modes, it'll likely launch with more characters, way more features, more stuff that you can do, more stuff, more functionality online. It'll probably have all the things that a lot of people have been complaining about, the battle pass stuff, like all that shit. It'll be in a significantly better state of play by the time 2024 rolls around. And they need time. Like, you need to get all hands on deck and, you know, be ready for your official launch. Would it have been better if they were, you know, ready to go, kind of like an Apex Legends situation? Of course, man. If they were 100% like kind of ready to go and guns a-blazing, like Apex kind of was when that shit came out, and they were sort of like ready for the success of the game and able to keep up with it, then yeah, like it would be in a much different situation than they are now. But there was a lot of really bad decisions and lack of communication that happened over the 6 months Multiversus was in its like beta state, where people just didn't know what the hell was going on. I think this all boils down to, like, they had the right idea and they got the audience. They just didn't know how to capitalize on it. And you would think that that would be like the no-brainer situation. But that shockingly, as I've talked to people that have been, you know, financially involved in several other games and situations like this happens a lot. This is not a unique situation to Multiversus specifically, and now the big challenge will be if they can get that audience back. I don't think it's going to be almost impossible to reach the same numbers that they were able to hit at launch, even with the official launch. That ends up being the biggest thing. They were trying to prove with that beta that this can be successful. The problem is that they proved that it could be successful, but they were absolutely not ready for the success at that point. And again, that's the situation that happens a lot in this environment of free-to-play, if not, you know, games as a service game, where right outcome, wrong time, and they did not respond fast enough. You know, they pretty much called their own bluff. Yeah, where they had a game that was relatively decent quality, functioning on a lot of systems, had characters people liked, was a Smash Brothers. Like, there's a lot of things that were lining up there, and damn, they got the numbers. It'll be tough, right? It'll be tough. I think it'll be a much better game by the time it happens in 2024. My mind has already been kind of made up on what it is, but will we check it out? Absolutely. I'll be very curious to see how the gameplay specifically changes. Multiversus has always felt really slippery to me, with its kind of like missing hit stun in some situations. I kind of like the other Smash Brothers games that don't all feel like Smash Brothers Melee, and I feel like a lot of these games try to make them feel like Smash Brothers Melee in some ways. I hope the best for them. I'm actually really curious to see how Multiversus bounces back in this situation. That's going to be even harder, right? It's going to be even harder to try to reestablish themselves after getting that audience already and then grabbing it again. Some big things are going to have to change.